literary citizens! Happy almost Thanksgiving! In celebration of tomorrow and in celebration of Food Month here at Late Night Library, I thought I'd share with you some of my favorite stories and scenes involving food. Now, you may notice that these are all children's books, and there's a reason for that. Food in adult books is weird. Most novels don't even mention food, except maybe in passing, unless you're reading literary fiction, and we all know what food in literary fiction is like. It's pretentious and symbolic, and usually described in a really awkward sexual way. I don't want to read about Ethan Frome's pickle dish, I just want to read about butterbeer and 3-course meal chewing gum so I can cry into my boring-ass pasta later. So the number 5 spot on my list goes to this bedtime story called Nail Soup, which is a variation on the folk story Stone Soup. So a tramp comes to this lady's house and asks if she'll give him shelter, and she's like, sure, but no dinner for you because I don't have any food. And the tramp, suspecting that she's actually just a miserly old Scrooge who doesn't want to share, pulls a nail out of his pocket and says, well, I can make the best soup ever if you can just give me a pot to boil some water in. So he puts the nail in the pot, and then he says, you know, too bad you don't have any salt and pepper, because that would make a good soup into a great soup. And she's like, well, you know, I could maybe find some salt and pepper. And eventually, he convinces her to add salt and pepper and onions and carrots and potatoes and parsnips and a steak. I'm not sure who puts steak in soup. They top it off with bread and cheese and wine, and then they finish with apple pie and chocolates for dessert. Number 4 is Big Bird's Day on the Farm, and I'm not even kidding you, this was like my favorite book when I was a kid. It single-handedly convinced me that I wanted to live on a farm. So basically, Big Bird gets lost on his way to Sesame Street, and then he comes across a farm where he meets these 2 kids who teach him how to milk cows, collect eggs, harvest honey, pick apples, and gather vegetables. And then they go back to the farmhouse and have a delicious lunch with all the fresh food, and if this picture doesn't make you hungry, I don't know what will. Now we're getting into books that don't have pictures with number 3. The Secret Garden has a lot more flowers than food in it, but the bits it does have about eating are fantastic. He made up his mind to eat less, but unfortunately it was not possible to carry out this brilliant idea when he wakened each morning with an amazing appetite, and the table near his sofa was set with a breakfast of homemade bread and fresh butter, snow-white eggs, raspberry jam, and clotted cream. Mary always breakfasted with him, and when they found themselves at the table, particularly if there were delicate slices of sizzling ham sending forth tempting odors from under a hot silver cover, they would look into each other's eyes in desperation. Dickon made the stimulating discovery that in the wood in the park outside the garden where Mary had first found him piping to the wild creatures, there was a deep little hollow where you could build a sort of tiny oven with stones and roast potatoes and eggs in it. Roasted eggs were a previously unknown luxury, and very hot potatoes with salt and fresh butter in them were fit for a woodland king. My runner-up is Harry Potter, partially because everyone remembers the first time they read about chocolate frogs and Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. But J.K. Rowling didn't just invent an abundance of wizard candy, she also wrote great feast scenes. Harry's mouth fell open. The dishes in front of him were now piled with food. He had never seen so many things he liked to eat on one table. Roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops and lamb chops, sausages, bacon and steak, boiled potatoes, roast potatoes, fries, Yorkshire pudding, peas, carrots, gravy, ketchup, and for some strange reason, peppermint humbugs. When everyone had eaten as much as they could, the remains of the food faded from the plates, leaving them sparkling clean as before. A moment later, the desserts appeared. Blocks of ice cream in every flavor you could think of, apple pies, treacle tarts, chocolate eclairs, and jam donuts, trifles, strawberries, jello, rice pudding. I didn't even know what treacle tart was when I first read this, and I still wanted some. And finally, the award for the best food scenes I have ever read goes to the Little House on the Prairie series. I'm pretty sure some of the earlier books are at least 50% made out of food descriptions, including explanations of how the pioneers smoked meat, sapped maple trees, made butter and cheese and candy and ice cream, but here's a passage to get you ready for Thanksgiving. With the butcher knife, Ma cut the big orange-colored pumpkins into halves. She cleaned the seeds out of the center and cut the pumpkin into long slices from which she pared the rind. Laura helped her cut the slices into cubes. Ma put the cubes into the big iron pot on the stove, poured in some water, and then watched while the pumpkin slowly boiled down all day long. All the water and the juice must be boiled away, and the pumpkin must never burn. The pumpkin was a thick, dark, good-smelling mass in the kettle. It did not boil like water, but bubbles came up in it and suddenly exploded, leaving holes that closed quickly. Every time a bubble exploded, the rich, hot pumpkin smell came out. Technically, this one's about Christmas, but everyone knows that Thanksgiving is basically the start of Christmas season anyway, so close enough. He looked at the crisp, crackling little pig lying on the blue platter with an apple in its mouth. He looked at the fat roast goose, the drumsticks sticking up, and the edges of dressing curling out. The sound of Father's knife sharpening on the whetstone made him even hungrier. He looked at the big bowl of cranberry jelly and at the fluffy mountain of mashed potatoes with melting butter trickling down it. He looked at the heap of mashed turnips and the golden-baked squash and the pale, fried parsnips. He swallowed hard and tried not to look any more. He couldn't help seeing the fried apples and onions and the candied carrots. He couldn't help gazing at the triangles of pie waiting by his plate. The spicy pumpkin pie, the melting cream pie, the rich, dark mince oozing from between the mince pie's flaky crusts. He squeezed his hands together between his knees. He had to sit silent and wait, but he felt aching and hollow inside. Don't we all? So what are some of your favorite food scenes from books? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and have a very happy Thanksgiving. See you next week! So the number 5 spot on my list goes to one of these bedtime stories called Stone Soup. Nail Soup, which is a variation on the folk story Stone Soup. Oops. Wrong page. Not that one. That one doesn't have any food in it.